If we eat the wrong foods, our gut suffers terribly and our good bacteria practically starve. Meanwhile, our bad gut bacteria, which should only exist in very, very small amounts, can actually explode in number. But that's not all. Sooner or later, they cause serious gut issues like stomach pain, bloating, constipation, or even diarrhea. Furthermore, they can promote inflammation and significantly increase the risk of cancer, colon cancer, or even liver cirrhosis. That's why we need to know and avoid these harmful foods to maintain gut health for a long time. In this video, you'll learn which foods these are and why they're so harmful to our gut flora. By eating the wrong foods, you can really set yourself up for a gut disorder. And that's actually quite common. Around 70% of people report suffering from bloating, diarrhea, constipation, and stomach pain or cramps. And in a recent study, it was found that 1 in 5 people surveyed reported that they suffer from what's known as irritable bowel syndrome. The key to all of this is gut bacteria. We have approximately up to 2 kilos of gut bacteria residing in our bodies. The big issue at hand is putrefactive bacteria, which are known to drive intestinal diseases and push out our beneficial gut bacteria. We can find these harmful bacteria in either the large intestine or the small intestine. And by the way, these aren't bacteria that come from outside, like when you get diarrhea while traveling. Instead, they're bacteria that already live inside us and can multiply explosively if they get the wrong foods, the wrong fuel. And we're talking about 2 major areas. First, there's putrefactive bacteria or putrefaction in the small intestine, known as SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, when too many colon bacteria settle there. Then we have colonic dysbiosis, which can lead to smelly gas, diarrhea, or stomach pain. That's often where you'll find the putrefactive bacteria load in the colon. And one of the worst foods we can consume for our gut is regular sugar. Sugar massively disrupts the balance of these gut bacteria. It promotes the growth of harmful bacteria, encourages the growth of fungi, and this simply leads to symptoms like diarrhea, bloating, constipation, abdominal pain, and especially when combined with high-fat foods, it gets really bad. In 2013, it was proven that sugar and fat are the main risk factors for developing chronic inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, which are really serious intestinal diseases. This combination particularly damages the gut flora, increases susceptibility to infections, and makes the mucous membrane down there more permeable, known as leaky gut syndrome. We need to discuss various different types of sugar. One common type that we often encounter is glucose, which is also known as dextrose. Dextrose is absorbed relatively quickly in the small intestine, causing blood sugar levels to rise rapidly, but in large amounts, it negatively impacts the gut and sugar metabolism. Topic: diabetes and so on. Many people also can't tolerate fruit sugar, fructose, which is usually well tolerated, but if you have fructose intolerance, this fruit sugar can cause a lot of bloating and diarrhea. Later in the video, we'll also discuss the so-called FODMAPs, carbohydrates and fiber. But let's start by taking another look at sugars, especially when it comes to SIBO. SIBO is a term not many people have heard of, though those with gut issues might be familiar with it. The problem here is that large amounts of colon bacteria end up in the small intestine. There are many different causes. One of the most common might be diarrhea during a trip, an infection, taking antibiotics, surgery, or anything else that triggers this condition, but the bacteria don't belong there. Even the smallest amounts of sugar can cause these bacteria to grow explosively, leading to massive gas production, which might show up as excessive burping, stomach pain, or very painful bloating, along with lots of gas. So, throw out your household sugar and cut back on sweets, not just because of the calories and diabetes risk, but primarily for the overall health of your gut flora. It really wants fiber, fruits and vegetables to thrive and flourish. And by the way, please share this video if you're a parent or know other parents, especially with grandparents who mean well, in quotes, with our little ones and tend to overdo it and downplay the seriousness of this important issue. So, I'd be thrilled if you share this video and especially subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these health tips. But it doesn't seem to be that simple with carbohydrates, sugars and fiber, because we're seeing a trend, especially in the USA, towards what's called a meat diet, carnivore diet, where people eat only meat. And many people who have suffered from gut issues report very positively here. Why? We need to keep in mind that when we remove fiber, when we completely remove carbohydrates, and if we haven't digested these fibers and carbohydrates because we had such a strong putrefactive flora, we need our protein splitting enzymes for digesting these proteins. And they just don't work at all with a putrefactive flora. They're super lazy because the pH level is off, and especially those people report positively about the carnivore diet. However, I want to warn you, it doesn't solve the root problem, it only improves symptoms. And when it comes to gut health, we have truly valid data over decades showing that gut flora needs fiber. That's why the Mediterranean diet performs significantly better in long-term results. And let's see where the trend with the carnivore diet goes from here. One thing the gut flora really doesn't like is processed meat, like sausages, canned meats, or ham products. They contain a bunch of problematic ingredients, a high level of preservatives, lots of salt, flavor enhancers, and primarily animal fats, especially one fatty acid, arachidonic acid. And the problem is that we have these various ingredients on one hand and a significant lack of fiber on the other. This whole mix can really promote an inflammatory situation in the gut. So processed meat, and not many people know this, including sausage, has been classified in the same category as smoking cigarettes when it comes to cancer risk. And that's the highest category, meaning that sausage actually promotes cancer growth in a manner similar to smoking cigarettes. And while we're in the process of debunking various social media myths, there's currently another ongoing discussion about the so-called anti-nutrients. Maybe you've heard about lectins or oxalic acid. I could tell you a story about why that one doctor suddenly became so popular, but of course it's a great headline for the media. Vegetables make you sick, an antithesis the press loves to exploit. But what's the basic idea here? The background. Plants use lectins to protect themselves from pests and diseases. And the theory is that this can also be really dangerous for us humans and make us sick in the gut. The truth is, and all experts in 2001 agree on this, lectins are present in such small amounts in our food that a normal person can digest them without any issues. However, there are indeed people who are very sensitive to lectins. And again, the question is whether the lectin issue is really the main problem, or are we dealing with an imbalanced gut flora here? We know for sure that when putrefactive bacteria are present, fiber digestion stops working because these bacteria have displaced the good bacteria that produce the enzymes needed to digest fiber. So it's more likely that this is the real issue rather than an intolerance to lectins. Unfortunately, influencers exploit this and mislead people down the wrong path. Same with oxalic acid. It's also found in some foods and isn't a big problem for us humans. However, if you naturally tend to develop kidney stones or have kidney issues, it can become problematic. So don't worry about this anti-nutrient debate. Vegetables are and will always be super healthy. I wish I could say the same about dairy products, but many people are very, very sensitive to milk. But this isn't about lactose intolerance. Lactose intolerance means we can't break down this milk sugar, lactose, with an enzyme. But here it's about milk proteins. The proteins contained in milk, because they can really, really irritate the intestinal lining if there's a sensitivity. My brother was affected by this when he was young, as a child and teenager. It was such that if milk was heated on the stove, my brother, 2 floors above the kitchen, would have an allergic reaction because these milk molecules essentially triggered an allergy in him. Even small molecules are enough. And with milk, it can promote a leaky gut, an intestinal permeability issue, because we have a big problem, and that's pasteurization. This means the milk is overheated here. It's briefly pasteurized to kill the bacteria. So basically, all the enzymes and bacteria within our system are altered. The enzymes are changed, the bacteria are killed off, and the proteins are essentially altered in their structure. This presents unique challenges for our body because we're then faced with a completely new protein structure. I'm not trying to say that occasional milk consumption is problematic, but there are people who consume an insane amount of milk or dairy products, like one of my patients who was really seriously ill and drank 2 gallons of milk daily for years and ate nothing else because her mother said milk was so healthy. This can cause a defensive reaction in the mucous membrane. That's where the immune system is located, with about 70 to 80% of our immune cells sitting right under the intestinal mucosa, and it can lead to immunoglobulin reactions and defensive or pseudo-allergic reactions there. So I mainly recommend consuming dairy products in fermented forms. A good cheese, yogurt, kefir or buttermilk isn't a big issue. And many people then wonder, do I have to give up butter and cream from cow's milk too? No, not a problem at all. Why? Because these products are almost completely free of milk proteins. So that doesn't bother the gut flora at all, no problem. The question also is, what about cheese? Many people can't tolerate cheese made from pasteurized milk, but they do very well with high quality cheese. Sometimes from raw milk or well-aged cheese that's already a bit pre-fermented. And there's a similar issue with gluten, which is the sticky protein that is found in our grains. For many people, grains are a regular and essential part of their daily diet. About 1% of Germans suffer from what's known as celiac disease, a serious condition in which grains and gluten must be completely avoided in order to maintain health. There's another sensitivity called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Here, gluten molecules also irritate the intestinal lining. The intestinal lining becomes chronically inflamed as soon as gluten-containing foods are consumed, even though the person doesn't have celiac disease. People then react with a bloated stomach, diarrhea, possibly even vomiting and stomach pain. And we also know from studies that gluten can actually cause irritable bowel syndrome. Many patients with irritable bowel syndrome experience extreme worsening from gluten and significant improvements when they eliminate gluten. This was also examined in a double-blind study, placebo-controlled, just as it should be. Participants were first allowed gluten in their diet, so people with irritable bowel symptoms received gluten as usual, and in the study, wheat allergy and celiac disease were ruled out. So they had no immunological reaction to it. After some time, gluten was removed from their diet and they were fed gluten-free, leading to significant improvements in how people felt. Notably, they also reported clear enhancements in their mental well-being. Why? The key term is the gut-brain axis. We have a lot of neurotransmitters in the gut that are produced there and then used in the brain. Why does this happen? As the issue is simple. We know that gluten can potentially cause a leaky gut syndrome. And there you have what's called a barrier disruption. This means that the gut is actually there to ensure we only absorb the beneficial good stuff. The bad stuff shouldn't diffuse through the intestinal lining at all. And when this barrier gets broken down, it can lead to immune activation and the release of interleukins, which are immune messengers. And that's a huge problem for the immune system when the communication or border traffic isn't properly regulated. Furthermore, when several of these unhealthy foods come together in fast food or are fried, it gets really wild for our gut. We then have what is known as trans fats. These are very simple fatty acids that can be processed industrially very, very well. Trans fats are characterized by being very straight, very rigid, and our cells also become very rigid when these trans fatty acids are incorporated. In contrast to the good fats, which keep our cells nice and flexible and also keep our vessels flexible. And that basically leads us right back to inflammation. But we see that fast food, fried items and so on really disrupt the microbiome, which is the balance of good and bad gut bacteria. Another significant issue is that fast food often contains too much salt, too many hidden sugars, and is of course extremely low in fiber, which can become a really big problem for our health. Let's not even get started on the lack of nutrients. One of the worst things you can do for your gut is actually alcohol. Scientists in the US have found that alcohol is first converted into acetaldehyde and then further processed into acetate. And this excess acetate basically promotes these harmful gut bacteria completely. Acetate is also a so-called short-chain fatty acid, and in excess it really disrupts our environment down there. And then, of course, when we have things like beer, for example, there's alcohol in there plus a bunch of histamine. Think about a wheat beer, and then there's gluten, making it quite the explosive mix. And many people can't handle wheat beer at all. They react with massive smelly gas. And then, of course, brag about it with friends and so on, as we all know. But basically, we can already see how quickly these things get triggered. Even sugar consumption can quickly disrupt gut flora. It's not a process that takes years or months. It can happen over hours or days, putting us in a bad spot. Let's talk again about carbohydrates and fiber, because it's really, really interesting. And we need to understand why fiber is so healthy and why simple carbohydrates like white bread, cake, cookies, bagels, and so on are so bad. First off, fiber plays a vital role in helping us produce another short-chain fatty acid known as butyric acid or butyrate. This butyrate is crucial for our overall health. For one, it serves as the primary food source for our intestinal epithelial cells. That means the gut, the intestinal cells themselves, feed on this butyrate. Secondly, butyrate is responsible for our plugs, where the intestinal cells are connected. We actually have them like plugs inside. This is called tight junctions or screw connections. You can imagine it like this. Nothing can fit between the cells. That space is really, really tightly sealed. And butyrate is capable of repairing this leaky gut syndrome, this condition. That means only in the presence of butyrate does the whole thing work. Butyric acid ensures that we produce gut mucus, which is also very, very important for nourishing individual bacteria. Additionally, butyrate inhibits the growth of colon cancer cells and promotes the much discussed cell death, apoptosis. Moreover, butyrate is responsible for preventing constipation, keeping the gut nice and mobile. And we also need butyrate for good brain function. We know that people with low butyrate levels tend to experience depression and mood swings. So it's important that we eat these fibers so they can be converted into butyrate with the help of gut bacteria. This means the underlying issue is that many people are in a difficult situation. They can't digest fiber properly anymore. I want to explain to them why this is. In our gut, we have what's called the acidifying flora. This means there are gut bacteria that produce acids, not just these short-chain fatty acids, but also lactic acid, like lactobacilli, for example. And this amount of acid creates a specific pH level. But if we have putrefactive bacteria in there that shift this pH level because they suppress the bacteria that produce these acids, then our stool pH becomes too high, too alkaline, and that's a big problem for the digestive enzymes. These digestive enzymes basically don't work properly in this situation. We can no longer digest proteins and we can't properly break them down into amino acids. Instead, the proteins just sit there. You could say protein fragments are left behind, and that promotes putrefaction growth. The big issue here is that people who suffer from gut problems often stop eating fiber altogether. They skip the fiber, which is completely normal and understandable because they simply can't break it down properly. First, the stool pH is off, and second, the bacteria that produce the necessary enzymes to break down fiber are no longer present in their system. The solution is too simple. Well, it's not really a solution in principle if you just cut out fiber. It might even be temporarily necessary to get the gut flora back into a better state so it can function properly again. Talk, analyze the gut, rebuild the gut if you need help with that. I have lots of free resources linked below this video, and I also offer a gut rebuilding course, so that shouldn't be a problem anymore. How to do that? Specifically, the fatty acids or trans fats, they promote these conditions where the mucosal cells aren't tightly sealed anymore, but instead they gap open and form this leaky gut syndrome. And so, in combination with sugar, as mentioned, it leads to inflammation promotion. This means we have an increase of inflammation promoting molecules, markers in the gut. You know, the immune system with its cells really depends on the gut flora. Below the intestinal mucosa, we have what's called Peyer's patches. These are like elongated baguettes that are arranged around the entire gut space principle. And there, a whole lot of cells hang out. Primarily immune cells, white immune cells, and so on. Why? We know that because we eat all the time, 3 times a day. The lining of the gut is a very large reactive surface of the body, and that basically needs to be in good shape. And a big problem is when we see the weakening of these tight junctions, these dowels, these screw connections, this gut permeability, which simply increases, then our gut and immune system can get bombarded with viruses, bacteria, all kinds of parasites and preservatives. Everything basically becomes a problem because our protective barrier is no longer properly sealed. And sugar and these trans fats just fuel the whole thing. And there's a major player we need to keep in mind, and that's artificial sweeteners. We have clear data showing that sweeteners can negatively alter gut flora. The big issue is that we're also seeing a reduction in bacterial diversity here. So we don't just need a few types of bacteria in large amounts, we need a whole diverse bouquet of them. And the big problem is that we simply have people consuming large quantities of these sweeteners. If they consume small amounts occasionally, it's no problem at all. There's always talk here about sorbitol and xylitol, which can cause gas and diarrhea in larger quantities. That shouldn't be the issue. We've also seen in studies that sucralose, for example, might not be particularly healthy. So if you have a supplement with small amounts of it, that's no problem at all. But if you consume it in large quantities, it could potentially alter your gut flora over time. And studies also suggest that we might have pro-inflammatory effects from sweeteners. I would simply advise you to stick to natural sweeteners or use dates, fruits, or dried fruits for sweetening. So if you need larger amounts of sweeteners, definitely not with artificial ones. And similarly, the use of preservatives and antibiotics follows this trend. About 85% of all broiler chickens receive antibiotics. Small amounts of antibiotic residues are repeatedly found in poultry, as well as in beef, pork, milk, eggs, and sometimes even in honey. And that doesn't even seem to be the problem. However, the use of antibiotics is ramping up. That means from 2010 to 2020, about 50% more antibiotics were used in cattle fattening. Researchers from a university in Zurich have now analyzed data from 42 countries. It was observed that in 2020, nearly tons of antibiotics were used worldwide for livestock. The overall data is on the rise. The main concern isn't that antibiotics are in the food. The main worry is the development of antibiotic-resistant germs. And here we have a big problem because we're seeing small intestinal bacterial overgrowth known as SIBO. So when gut bacteria from the colon move up into the small intestine and come into contact with large amounts of fiber, carbohydrates and sugars, it can lead to explosive gas production. The small intestine is typically low in bacteria, while most of the bacteria reside in the colon. However, if the small intestine suddenly has a significant influx of gut bacteria, it can cause major digestive issues. If you're interested in this topic, it's estimated that 30, 40, up to 70% of all IBS patients have this kind of small intestine bacterial overgrowth. Check out my videos on the subject, as it's a whole different world of symptoms and a unique world of treatment for this issue. The big problem is that we might have bacteria that no longer respond to antibiotics or even to essential oils, which we use to treat this SIBO. That's the main concern researchers have when many antibiotics are used in livestock. I hope this video was helpful and gave you a better understanding of some connections. Subscribe to my channel if you want more videos like this. There's a new video every Wednesday and Sunday, and I want to thank my channel members who make these videos possible in the first place. Please take a moment to share this video, as I truly believe it contains some crucial information about gut health that you might not have been aware of before. Thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing you soon in the next video. See you then.